here we go. This is the September jobs report. Non-farm payrolls are up a robust 119,000. 119,000 would be the best since April, when we were up 158,000.
So today I want to discuss some of the brand new economic numbers that came out this week, because not only do they show positive signs for the future of the Trump economy over these next 4 years, but I think they're very important to point out for all of the panicins that you've seen in the past couple of weeks or so. Because I don't know if you've noticed, I don't know how much each of you individually traffics in like online conservatism on a regular basis, but if you've seen, ever since the New Jersey and Virginia election, there has basically been this mass panic on the right wing where everyone is saying, MAGA is dead, everybody freak out, jump ship, Trump betrayed us, the Republicans lost in Virginia, New Jersey, clearly we're never going to win another election ever again. And then conveniently, everyone's trying to pick their pet project issues for this is why Republicans lost the election. And usually it's like the Epstein files or Israel or something that clearly normal people outside of this bubble were clearly not voting on. And it's like, no. Here's the thing, right? When we understand what really happened in those elections, sure, Republican turnout was poor. That was a major contributing factor. But why was it poor? And why was Democrat turnout so good? I'd argue two key things. The government shutdown definitely did us no favors because it incentivized the whole liberal electorate to go vote, sure. But the other factor that maybe kind of demoralized Republicans certainly was the economy. It's the economy, stupid. If you want any indication of what's going to decide an election, that is absolutely going to be it. And that said, maybe in retrospect, we shouldn't be all that surprised that 2025, as I've been trying to tell you, is the recovery year, right? It was always going to start slow. It's not me coping. I was saying this even before Trump was inaugurated because I understood what happened with the COVID stimulus money and all that. We'll explain that. But anyways, to make a long story short, right? What I am watching, and the reason I'm not mass freaking out right now about Trump's approval rating, is the signs for the economy headed into 26 and especially headed into 2028 that seem to be headed in a positive direction. And you can flip the state of the economy, you can flip American perception of the economy, then all of this mass freaking out, all of the panic and behavior simply will be silenced. So that said, in today's video, I want to explain some of this to you, right? What the jobs report from September is showing and why that's showing that instead of going downhill, things are going uphill. The Atlanta Fed report, I should say, on GDP growth in the third quarter here. Some even, of the context on affordability and pricing. But again, tie this all back to the sort of presidential trend lines. And should we be freaking out about the state of Trump's presidency? I'll put it all in context. First, though, guys, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit the like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is not only the best way to support our work, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all the latest news and coverage. And with that said, as you can expect, the Trump administration this week is celebrating after the September jobs report just came out. Keep in mind, we will not have an October one because of the government shutdown, but nonetheless, a whopping 119,000 new jobs were added when many economists were thinking we would only add about 52,000, maybe even less than that, because the summer jobs reports were kind of weak, but now 119,000. There's starting to be this little surge. Take a listen to what J.D. Vance had to say. And this is, good news for the Trump administration and the economic approach, clearly.
Big news this morning is new jobs numbers blew away expectations.
Huge.
From the September numbers, so these were delayed because of the government shutdown, more than double, 119,000 new jobs. And then also there's some interesting stuff in the wages numbers there as well that shows wages on the rise. Your thoughts on the jobs numbers?
Okay, so a huge jobs report, and I assume the market is going crazy right now, probably just opened, because what this shows is that the Trump economic policies are actually working. And you've got 119,000 new jobs. Economists thought that we would have about 50,000 new jobs, but that's actually just the headline number. If you look below the surface, I think the numbers are actually better. So number one, wages continue to way outpace inflation. If you go back to the 3 years of the Biden administration, the average American worker actually lost about $3,000 of take-home pay. In the first 10 months of the Trump economy, we've increased take-home pay by about $1,200, adjusting for inflation. So that's a huge, huge thing, and this jobs report confirms that. You have the number of manufacturing hours worked in the economy is actually going up. You see the private sector is really driving this economic growth and is driving the job creation. And this is really important, I know, to you, Matt, but really to me. And it's that we are seeing the job growth go to native-born American citizens. And what happened under the Biden administration is, to the extent there was any job growth at all, if you looked at the data, almost all of the net job creation in the United States under the Biden administration went to the foreign-born. Now, of course, some of those people are legal immigrants to the United States, but that means that a lot of the job creation was actually going to illegal aliens who shouldn't have been in our country. The best thing that you can say about the Trump economy is that American jobs are going to American workers for a change, and that's the thing that I'm proudest about with these numbers.
We all live in a busy world where it's hard to keep up with everything. That's why I present you the Plod Note Pro, which is a real game changer. Whether you're a leader, working professional who wants to stay organized in face-to-face conversations, or an aspiring professional aiming to use the same tools as top leaders, Plod Note Pro is your answer. Plod Note Pro is more than just a recorder. It's basically a personal secretary in your pocket. So imagine walking into a discussion or in-person meeting, and you set this slim credit card-sized gadget down, and it picks up everything. But it doesn't stop at audio recording. You can also take pictures, type down thoughts, mark key points so that everything from a meeting is captured, synthesized, and understood for you by AI. Then comes the best part. The Plod app takes all of that. You don't just get a transcript, you get a highlighted summary, insights that actually help with decisions, and a to-do list for everyone involved. All done for you by AI. It even has a built-in ChatGPT-like assistant called Ask Plod. Think of it like your second brain. After a class or a meeting or a discussion, Plod can automatically draft stakeholder emails, extract data reports, or help you brainstorm next steps. So, guys, whatever you do for a living, if you want to stop worrying about missing details, check out the Plod Note Pro. Of course, I shouldn't have to say it, but always use the Plod Note Pro responsibly. Don't go recording people without their consent, being creepy, and especially do not conduct illegal espionage with this product, but be sure to go check out the Plod Note Pro. And that's what's so important to talk about as well. It's not just that we added 119,000 new jobs. We added them primarily for native-born American citizens in the private sector, right? We're not carrying along a fake economy like Canada, primarily off the public sector. No, it's private sector. It's organic growth. And at the same time, those wages are going up and they're starting to outpace the rate of inflation, which is really important when we talk about affordability, but we'll circle back to that in one moment. Here is the number over the past year or so of American-born jobs created, new jobs for them versus foreign-born. The American-born job market has increased by 2.5 million. The foreign-born has decreased by minus 670,000. And as JD Vance pointed out, this is a basically complete inversal of the trend that you saw under the Biden administration, where they talked about, all the new job growth. And yes, 90% of that was going to non-Americans, or at the very least, non-native born Americans. By the way, I wonder what types of Trump policies could have an impact on that. I don't think it's a big mystery, right? But casting further immigration debates aside for now, I do want to also speak about the wider state of the economy, because we did just get the new GDP forecast, the estimation of GDP growth in Q3 of 2025 from the Atlanta Federal Reserve, and their projection is now at 4.2%, which is really good GDP growth, right? 4.2. And this is in stark contrast to some of the weaker performances we saw earlier this year. I think, what was it, Q1, maybe Q2, where you saw a negative contraction and there was this feeling of stagnation in the economy. Now things are starting to pick up. Why is that significant? Well, something I said before the inauguration, right? This is not me playing Monday morning quarterback, is that 2025 was actually going to be a very slow year for the economy. And probably in the beginning, people would start to get unhappy with Trump. And I was like, people are just going to have to be patient about this, right? I actually projected we see a recession this year. I guess we didn't formally see that, but you could argue there was sort of a mini recession, silent. Certainly there's been stagnation in the economy up until this point, but things are starting to round the corner, right? So what is happening with that? Well, this is very important to understand. Is that what I would argue has nothing to do with tariffs or Liberation Day. I know that's going to be the mainstream narrative, but really these trends were set and forth a long time ago when, if you remember, the late parts of the Trump administration, but mainly the Biden administration, did what? COVID, right? Pumped a bunch of stimulus money into the economy that created an artificial bubble that was always going to burst. The same is true with the world opening back up again, and then everyone's buying these airline tickets on credit, and then, for like the next 2 years, tourism is super crowded. Now tourism's slowing down. There's this mass consumption, e-commerce. People won't stop buying stuff, right? You remember some of these economic trends. Well, the problem with this approach to economics is that it's not really real, right? Stimulus money in the economy temporarily feels good, but over the long term, as you learned during Biden, right, what do you get? Inflation. And then eventually there's a come down, there's a crash from the fact that, oh, wait a minute, none of that was real. That is, for instance, in the year 2025, conveniently, I would argue they sort of timed this so that Biden could win re-election. They just ultimately failed, as you could tell. You're starting to see a massive debt crisis, for instance, in a lot of America, whether that's personal debt, state debt, right? You ever notice a lot of these blue states are saying they're going bankrupt? It's like, what's up with that? Literally because they took a bunch of the COVID stimulus money, spent beyond their means, which a lot of people did. The bubble is burst now, right? There's no more of that fake illusion of prosperity, and now everyone's like, oh, shoot. So that's why you're seeing layoffs. That's why you're seeing budget cuts all over the place. And again, I say this was always going to happen. This is the mess that Trump was destined to inherit. This was my prediction back then. It's still true today. So I'm not at all concerned or really all that surprised that, yes, the economy is stagnant in 2025. It's not popular with people. They can blame Trump all they want, but this is just the simple reality. Again, what I've been looking for is not how the economy does in 25. I always thought that was going to be bad. But where are the trend lines headed for 2026 is big, but especially, right? Because economic recovery, frankly, always in history takes some degree of time. Where is it headed for, say, 2027, 2028 especially, right? We are in a recovery. It's going to take time. People can freak out all they want. The polls are going to show what they show. American voters are impatient. I understand all that. I'm not trying to downplay it. It is going to have some impact in elections. There's no way around that. But remember, we're on a 4-year cycle. When is the next national election? Not till 2028, right? So you got to play this game, and this is frankly nothing new in history. This is what happened with Obama. This is what happened with Ronald Reagan. Many other examples. We'll get more into Bill Clinton, by the way. We'll get more into that in a second, but just want to point that out, right? And then lastly, of course, on this question of affordability. Are things nearly as bad as people say? Well, here are those statistics.
When you look at overall inflation for the first year of Trump versus Biden, overall inflation was up 4.3%. Higher than Trump, just up 1.6%. Groceries under Biden in that time, up 3.8%. With Trump, up 1.3%. And then when it comes to gas, this is crazy. Biden up 24.4%. With Trump, it is actually down 5.4%. That is where the biggest difference is. And we heard from the HUD Secretary, Scott Turner, this afternoon. They are racing to cut red tape for construction projects because the belief among officials here is that if housing is the number one place where people are getting killed when it comes to affordability, if people are cutting red tape and able to build more houses and apartments, then the prices will come down. Pretty basic supply and demand.
And the inflation and affordability questions are important to address as well, because you currently have a lot of these impulsive, neurotic people out there who are like, Trump is not doing anything about affordability. The prices are still going up, right? And usually they're just Democrats arguing in bad faith. But I do hear these criticisms sometimes from Republicans and conservatives as well. They feel betrayed, I guess, on this issue. And it's like, well, I think some context is important there. And again, you just have to understand that this is politics and economics is never going to go as fast at the speed that democracy wants, okay? But I would point out, first of all, Trump has brought down prices in certain areas, like the gasoline stuff, right? The energy prices, absolutely. That is already a promise made, promise kept, okay? Some people live in blue states and claim their gas is still the same. I don't know what to tell you, okay? That's your problem. Everywhere else in America, we definitely see gas prices going down. Me, anecdotally, my electricity has been super cheap as of late. Groceries, sure, are a mixed bag. Certainly beef prices are up. There's some supply chain issues right now that, by the way, the USDA themselves are trying to investigate, but beef is up. But I've also noticed other areas of the grocery store, like chicken, for instance, turkey, eggs, they seem pretty cheap to me. I don't know. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention. Maybe I'm losing my mind or something, but I absolutely get it. I'm not trying to sound like a condescending elitist. Certainly prices probably for Americans right now are not where people feel they need to be. But that said, what I'm personally looking at is the macro trend here, because I'm anticipating how are people going to feel in 2 to 3 years. So you see on one hand that overall inflation is slowing down, right? Keep in mind the rate of inflation is the rate at which prices go up. But as Vance pointed out, perhaps the most important aspect is that wages under the Trump administration have been consistently outpacing the rate of increase of inflation, right? And that's something that immediately Americans don't notice. That takes time to notice, hey, my purchasing power is getting better over time, even if the prices are going up. But again, that's why what I'm looking at is that the trends are in a positive direction for 2026 and beyond, right? I think that 2025, again, was always going to be a recovery year. What I'm looking at, what the markets are looking at, which by the way, they're kind of down right now, but this month you also saw the stock market hit an all-time high. What's up with that? Is that I think businesses, investors are feeling like there's a little bit more stability now coming to the tariff regime. We got over the worst of that COVID bubble bursting, which, by the way, was starting even before Trump took office. And now 2026 is primed to be a boom year after we just got out of this recovery. And that'll happen, hopefully through 27, through 28, and into the next election. So that's, something very important to point out, right? And of course, the reason I'm bringing this up as well is because, first of all, again, I think when it comes to politics, it's always the economy, stupid. When you want to talk about the electorate, right? I'm not saying other issues don't matter. I care, for instance, a lot about like immigration and stuff like that. But this is very relevant when we bring up, for instance, the conversation over Trump's approval rating, because I'm sure you've been hearing a lot of, say, demoralization propaganda like this as of late.
President Trump's approval rating falling to 38%. That is the lowest it's been in his second term. People are unhappy with Trump's handling of consumer prices and, yes, the Epstein files. Kim Strassel joining us this morning. Does this mean Trump's affordability messaging isn't working yet?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Stuart. And this is a huge wake-up call for Republicans. And if you actually look at Trump's approval rating, it actually has been sliding for a while. And I think what happened here is voters had a lot of optimism that he really was going to turn around the economy. And they've given him, 9 months now, and they've been waiting. But suddenly they've been looking around, and things really haven't improved to the degree that they thought they would on cost of living. Yeah, I mean, gas prices down in some areas of the country. There are some glimmers of good news here and there. But overall, he's not performed, and that's what the polls are saying. He's not lived up to people's expectations. So Republicans, they got a lot of work to do in a short period of time before the midterm.
So this is a lot of chatter that you're hearing. The sky is falling. The walls are caving in for Trump. He's a failed president. And I understand I'm going to be accused of coping or making excuses or whatever. Fine. I don't really care what people say. But it's just the simple reality that what you're watching right now with the economy, with the approval rating, etc., is a very normal trend with a lot of historical precedent in presidential politics. What do we mean by that? Well, actually, despite all this talk about how could your approval rating be sliding off a cliff or nosediving in the first year, if you even believe that's true, but let's just entertain the idea that it is. I like to point out that, as I put here, it's actually an extremely normal trend for presidential approval ratings to nosedive in the first year. Why is that? Because you win the election, and then you're on the honeymoon, right? You kind of try to give these speeches uniting the country. People have optimism. Maybe things will really change. You get inaugurated, and then what happens, right? It always goes this way. This is kind of like the nature of, I guess, quote unquote, democracy itself, is that once you start doing things, people will get upset. Some of the squishy independent voters will feel like, oh, I didn't think you were actually going to pass this X, Y, and Z policy. And then they start to get mad. So that's a trend on deportations, maybe some issues like that. You'll have your own base, maybe not think you're doing enough, etc. And yeah, just as the time goes on and, all of your policies are getting passed, you anger more people, etc. In the first year, you'll start to see that dip. So, that's Trump right there in the bold red. But here, look, that's Obama. That's Biden. This trend line goes for a very long time. I mean, for instance, look at Obama versus George W. Bush, right? Same trend. Now, because of 9/11, right, that spiked up Bush's approval rating. So that's kind of a exceptional circumstance. But keep in mind, this is normally the case, especially, guys, very important, especially when you are in a period of economic recovery. And why is that? Because economic recovery always, folks, happens at a slower rate than people like it to, right? Prime example of this, by the way, is literally Ronald Reagan. Okay. As much as the 1980s are seen as boom years and Reagan is remembered as this very successful conservative president and America was roaring, actually, when he inherited the economic disaster of Jimmy Carter, initially that was not the case. In the years 1981 to 1982, it was an extremely sluggish start for the economy. His approval rating, yes, much like you're seeing right now through the economic recovery, took a nosedive because he tried to do more of the supply side economics, right? Much like Trump, by the way. I mean, there are some differences, but they both basically took a failed economy, tried to reorient the economic vision, and guess what happens? Initially, people will not be happy with that. Initially, there'll be some shock, and sure, the climb out of it is not going to be very easy. So guess what as well happened in the 1982 midterms, if people don't exactly remember the history there, but Republicans got destroyed. In 1982, Democrats flipped control of the House of Representatives from the Republicans, right? No longer had a trifecta. They picked up a net gain of 26 House seats. Sounds like a pretty convincing victory, right? Republicans also lost about a seat or two in the Senate. And yet in 1984, off of that midterm performance, Ronald Reagan only won, 49 out of 50 states, the largest landslide in the history of presidential politics. Why did that happen? Because again, the first 2 years were kind of slow because you're reorienting things, you're trying to rebuild something. But then by 84, people were like, I really like the way things are going, right? Because voters, yes, believe it or not, are kind of neurotic like that. And you kind of just have to put up with it as it is. That's why I'm not concerned how things went in 2025. I'm looking to 26 in the future and saying, is the economy primed for that style of recovery that we've seen in the past? Even, by the way, Obama, you could argue, when he got reelected, dealt with a similar trend line. I mean, so he took office. He was one of the most popular presidents in modern history. There was the honeymoon, and then guess what happens? He takes office. Obamacare is not as popular as it was on the campaign trail. And by the way, of course, secondly, the recovery, sound familiar? Noticing a trend here? Because it kind of always goes like this, right? The recovery from the 2008 recession was perceived to be very slow. So what happened as a result of that? Democrats went into the 2010 midterms, if you know anything about the history, got absolutely destroyed. So here likewise are those numbers for you. Going into the start of Obama's presidency, the Democrats had 60 Senate seats. That is right, a filibuster-proof majority. That's how big and momentous the 2008 election was for their party. Now, one Democrat, I believe it was, Ted Kennedy out of Massachusetts, he passed away while he was in office. And check this out. The red wave in response was so bad that actually a Republican flipped and won the Senate seat for the special election in Massachusetts. That is right. That was the backlash against Obama. Some people don't remember that. Oh, he was a super popular president the whole time. No. There's always this revisionist history that happens with presidents, right? So then Democrats were down to 59 Senate seats. And then furthermore, after that, what we saw was after the 2010 midterms, Republicans gained a net of +6 seats in the U.S. Senate. Oh, and by the way, on the House level in the 2010 midterms, Republicans flipped a whopping 63 seats. That has to be maybe one of the worst performances in midterm history. I don't know the records there. But yeah, 63 seats. For comparison, by the way, in 2018, keep in mind, I think there's a wide consensus, Trump would have easily won re-election without the whole COVID situation. Republicans lost 41 seats in those 2018 midterms. So you're noticing something of a pattern here, right? We just mentioned two prior presidents who got rocked in their respective midterm elections and, special elections throughout those years, largely due to a stagnant start to the economy, who ended up winning really impressive re-elections. What is that all about, right? What's the point we're trying to make with this? I'm not trying to downplay people's concerns. I'm not telling you it's an automatic guarantee. But what I do see happening is a very similar cycle to that, where the recovery that's being inherited is not coming off as fast as people like it. And, it is what it is, right? That's just going to have to be something we deal with. And, I don't want to lose the midterms, but let's say we do lose the midterms because that recovery is still not in the position it needs to be. Okay, same thing, by the way, happened in 2018, right? When did the economy pre-COVID start to roar? It was 2019. It was early 2020 before that all happened, right? That was when it was in a really good position. The same was true for Reagan. Obama, I don't know if you'd even say he was roaring, but he got to like a relatively stable enough optimistic position by 2012, you know? This is, again, just the cycle that it all follows. And in my eyes, we are starting to see those positive signs in the economy. Sure, there's a lot of work to be done. But we got to look at the trend, right? The way things are either heading in a positive direction or a negative direction. What do we see? Positive GDP growth, positive jobs reports. By the way, those jobs largely going to Americans and hence raising the salaries and wages of Americans, which I think is going to be another important thing that we want to see in the Trump economy, because the biggest issue I could see is that, well, the economy rebounds, but there's not enough like new job hiring because of, say, AI and automation, maybe even immigration, but I don't think with the Trump reforms that's going to be the case. But I'm more worried about the automation aspect of it, right? So you definitely want to see the jobs going to Americans and make sure that it's physical and it's like it's going to people and they're actually making the money, so that way Americans feel the prosperity of the economy and they actually get to be a part of it. So that's, yeah, sure, concern. But as long as you can get that done and you follow all these other trend lines, I think it's actually headed in a good position, right? It's going to take time. It's going to happen slower than anyone wants. I get all of that. But at the end of the day, right, if you want to talk about Trump's approval rating or where it is or how voters are feeling, what happened in New Jersey, what happened in Virginia, besides the government shutdown, is very simple, right? It always has been. It's the economy, stupid. And there's nothing that we could have done about that. However, the good news is, in my eyes, you look at broader trends, the economy is headed in a good direction for sure. And by the way, by next year, big beautiful bill kicks in. What does that involve? A bunch of tax cuts, a bunch of deregulation, pro-business policies, etc. Why do you think the investors towards the end of the year are starting to get a little bit more bullish about next year? Because they understand the new regime that's going to take place. And, the first year you're trying to sort out what policies you actually want to implement. By next year, you implement them. By 28, hopefully, God forbid, something crazy happens. Hopefully, we're in the position where those policies are working for people and people notice it. And so we'll find out. So anyways, guys, all right, be concerned. I get it. Talk what you want to talk about, but also have some perspective about all of these things. Okay. You may think the sky is falling. In historical context for Trump, it absolutely is not. That's just not the case. So just keep that in mind. Anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.